Just give me a second. I should probably sit up like a
radio host, like you're actually Joe Rogan or something. You want to be Joe Rogan. No, actually, you're probably Jordan Peterson in disguise or something. It's like shit.
No, you know what? It's if I could make a choice, it would be Conan O'Brien, actually.
Oh yeah, I agree.
Right, yeah. Joe Rogan's only 5'3". I need to sit on a booster seat or something. Cardano Citizen. Cardano Citizen. Cardano Citizen. Welcome to the show this week. We are glad to even have you here. I don't know how to write an intro for my little podcast, but thank you for being here. We have a good guest. Okay, yeah, let me dial that back. Welcome to the show. Welcome to the show. So this episode, we have Adjunct Professor of Economics from the University of Alberta, Mark Anielski. Like I said, Mark is a professor. Mark is also a consultant of economics to various business organizations all over the world, including, and not limited to, the scale of entire sovereign wealth funds. Mark's view on economics centers around measuring what's truly important for the well-being and prosperity of the citizens of a country. In this episode, we discuss all types of various economic topics, including the creation of money and the impact of debt, aspects of economic history that are not well known, a little bit about the current state of affairs, and some proposed avenues of solution to maybe bring ourselves back from the brink and facilitate financial sovereignty. This interview really is a good one. Stay tuned to the end of the show, where again I have no payoff. Here's Mark. Hello, Mark Anielski, if I got that right.
You got it right, Charles.
How's it going, sir? Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on the show, your show.
So to introduce you to my audience, obviously your name is Mark. You are a professor of economics at the University of Alberta, which is my home province.
Incorrect.
Oh,
former professor.
I did not know that.
Former, technically adjunct professor in the School of Business. And
I don't understand what an adjunct professor is. Sorry.
Well, there's this terminology that academia likes to use. So I can't call myself a professor because I'm not actually a PhD or in the system. But I was for 10 years an adjunct professor in corporate social responsibility and left in 2012 after 10 years of founding the course and teaching it. Oh,
okay. So I misread whatever bio I was coming across to do research. So what are you up to now? I know you do a lot of consultant work based around your economic credentials.
Yes. So at the moment, I've always had my consulting firm, Anielski Management, and since 1995. And so still do consulting with mostly First Nations now. I'm also the lead economist with the Indigenomics Institute, which Carol Ann Hilton founded. She's in Victoria. So I do a lot of economic strategy work with First Nations.
Interesting. So I came across your name, your work, and your material after hunting down Peter Block, who at the time of this recording is 2 episodes ago. I've already released that podcast. So my common listeners know that episode, but you're friends with Peter. And then in looking through Peter's material and seeing some of his influences, he listed you among his main influences. And one of your specialties, as far as I understand, is what you call the economics of well-being.
And happiness.
Well-being and happiness. Yeah. So I guess I haven't really thought too far ahead of how to describe this, but the original reason I was hunting down an economist is because Cardano, the blockchain, Ecosystem has its sights set on Africa.
Mm-hmm.
And very much so in a sort of, what would you call that? Mission is a little bit grandiose of a term, but to bank the unbanked, right? As a sort of initial step. That's the Cardano. It's the vision inside the Cardano DNA.
Okay.
Banking the unbanked. So, it was always curious to me, like, okay, what kind of problems does that bring up in terms of, it leads to huge questions of, why Africa is in the condition that it is. How can it be brought about on a quick turnaround to join the rest of the world? And then you get into other sort of questions eventually in the terms of the, what would you call that? The morality of that?
Mm-hmm.
Are we just being colonialists when we do that?
Morality and our colonial subjugation past, yeah.
Yeah, or is it just a sort of new form of doing the old thing? And you yourself are, I've described you to other people as I've tried to get you on the show, an economist who's crypto friendly and Africa aware. You know what I mean? Like a lot of economists are China specialists or something like that.
Well,
I
was senior,
or South Africa.
I was senior advisor to China between 2003 and 6, economic advisor. And I've actually, other than Egypt, I've never been to Africa, though I've had a lot of interest from Zimbabwe, Nigeria, Botswana, Rwanda about the work I do on well-being economics. Yeah.
So how about a primer on your, I want to call it alternative economics almost, in your approach to economics and a well-being approach, as opposed to the, I guess, traditional, this is GDP and that means the economics is healthy.
Sure. Well, the GDP, or gross domestic product, has been our primary measure of progress since World War II. And it's the term is called, it's actually under the auspices of what's called national income accounting. So that system was set up basically during World War II, primarily initially in Britain, to measure the cash flow in the war economy as a basis of taxation. And then eventually it became the dominant accounting protocol, really formulated in the U.S. and then the globe adopted this national income accounting system. And I describe it as a kind of sausage factory out of which, pops this gross domestic product, which is basically the sum total of household spending, government spending, and business spending. Now, that measure of monetary progress misses a lot of things, like doesn't count unpaid work, volunteerism, childcare, elder care. So in any kind of use of time where no money is changing hands, that time doesn't get counted. And it also excludes some social costs like poverty or unemployment, doesn't count conflict, crime, doesn't count environmental degradation, pollution. So it doesn't count a lot of things that I call at the very best depreciated or unaccounted environmental and social liabilities.
Like maybe fraud and money laundering and stuff like that would not
exactly.
Either in illicit markets.
Yeah. So, I mean, one of my euphemisms is if you want fantastic GDP growth, you pick a chain-smoking, divorcing man chewing on a McDonald's hamburger, fast food, and has a car crash in the middle of all this as he's yelling at his ex, on the car phone. And that'd be a fantastic GDP, contribution. Yet the people who are in harmony and, dad, maybe parents work at home. They walk their kids to school, right? They make them lunch, all that character is a villain in GDP because there's no cash or very little cash, changing hands. So Alberta is a fantastic GDP model because we have high incomes. We spend a lot of money. Do we spend money on good things, or do we have too much money that we're kind of, so much money that we're sort of, we're not spending it wisely. And then we've got all these environmental liabilities like well site cleanup, and that actually don't sit anywhere on the accounts of Alberta or the industry. So we've got all of these kind of egregious, or I would say very poor accounting protocols for measuring what we might think is quality of life or progress.
And, we're both from Alberta, so I relate to you exactly what you're saying, even though I'm nowhere near any sort of economics trained person or anything like that. But I mean, I'm from Alberta. I myself can kind of give myself a pat on the back about my own money, but I also know 20 people with huge jacked up trucks and a $15,000 snowmobile that they've taken out twice, and you know what I mean? And then the economy tanked and now everyone's in a bind, right? But, so I see it, but on the same hand, we describe that as Alberta, but really, I mean, Alberta's kind of bad off for how it's been for the last 3 decades, but the whole Western, I mean, the US is like this, Canada's like this, right? So it's not just Alberta.
Yeah. So my work has been sort of begging the question, what is genuine or authentic progress? Robert Kennedy, 1968, said that the GDP measures everything except the things that make life worthwhile.
I remember that.
And it's remarkable that he even gave that speech in Kansas City, of all places, at the University of Kansas City. And in the middle of his speech, he throws in this GDP reflection. And that was at a time when the U.S. inequality was the lowest it's ever been. After his assassination, inequality rises. And so what he was basically saying is, how come we're not measuring the things that make life worthwhile? And now we don't expect GDP to measure quality of life, but my work says, well, we can measure well-being in terms of how we perceive well-being, perceptual well-being, and we can create an accounting system that identifies indicators that actually matter in terms of the progress we're making towards this well-being bottom line. So it's not just about money. It's fine to have a sufficient income and living wages and all that. And there's a threshold there in terms of happiness and income. That relationship is an interesting one. And Alberta's way beyond that in the sort of conventional, some economists say there's a kind of threshold of income to happiness that occurs around $70,000 US, right? So that begs the question, well, so why do we have to keep growing the economy? Why do we have to keep pumping more oil? Even as we don't count the liabilities of greenhouse gas emissions or well site cleanup. These are all they're just poor accounting at one level and not very sensitive to what Albertans actually define as quality of life and well-being. So
no one bothers to ask. And if they did, they don't care about the response.
They don't care. And of course, I mean, people will say, well, you must be some rogue economist, as Mr. Flaherty called me years ago in Calgary. And I said, well, I don't even know what that means, rogue economist. You mean I'm outside of the guild of the Temple of Economics? Well, I might be, but I understand economics because economics means household management or stewardship. And the word wealth actually means the conditions of well-being from the Old English. So when I wrote my book, The Economics of Happiness, in 2007, I pointed out that all these words that we would teach our business students or economic students, they never heard the origins of those words. I never heard them when I was in economics at the University of Alberta. So for me, it was like, wow, it's an awareness if we actually return to the origin of the words that were used in business, like the word competition means to strive together, then I think the conversation would change. The political ideology might shift a little bit, and maybe if the word wealth means well-being, then we can actually, when we use the word wealth, we can actually meaningfully say it's about well-being. And then we can shift our accounting systems to orient towards that North Star of well-being.
Well, and I think that dovetails a little bit into the idea. I mean, obviously, you've done also the work of trying to delineate a alternative system, or a system that allows for people to do that. In researching your stuff, which is vast, you have something called GPI, and I believe a 5 capital asset accounting model.
Yeah.
Is that accurate? And would you go into those just a tiny bit to let people know what they are?
Sure. So the GPI stands for the genuine progress indicator, or index. And it came out of the US in 1995. So I was sitting in my little cubicle in Alberta Treasury or Finance. This is a call today. And Jim Denning was my boss. And Ralph Klein was the premier.
Cowboy Ralph.
Yeah. So this report called the U.S. Genuine Progress Indicator came to my attention, and I was sitting in the performance measurement area of Treasury, and we were the first province to start writing business plans and start to measure performance, right? In terms of no other government in Canada was doing that, and so I was part of that team. When I saw that GPI report, I was excited. That they use the word genuine, which suggests that other indicators are not authentic, not genuine. So it's a pretty bold statement to say, okay, and they were basically teed off on Robert Kennedy's critique. So what they proposed is a broader suite of indicators and these indicators would be things like the cost of car crashes, the loss the loss of non-renewable resources like oil and gas. So as you draw down that asset, you should be looking at how many years are left in that reserve of oil and gas.
Okay. Yeah.
Or loss of forests or unsustainable forest use. Loss of wetlands, loss of good agricultural soil, pollution, inequality. So that's what GPI try to do, is say we will start with GDP and then we'll present a revised income statement that has these social and environmental costs netted out. And then we added things like the value of unpaid work, which in Alberta is about 35% of the economy would be the value of unpaid work. So that means all volunteer time, the time if you're a stay-at-home parent, so any time that you're spending outside of the labor market, the paid market, as a 15 to 65-year-old person that could work, that we call unpaid work, uncompensated work. So that's a huge value. It's 35% of the GDP. So that's kind of what we came up with, and I did that. Actually, I got contracted to do the U.S. GPI the year after I left government in '99, and then I led a team at the Pembina Institute to do the Alberta GPI. So we did the very same kind of analysis for Alberta.
Wow!
And in that process, in actually working with the think tank in San Francisco on this work, I proposed that we would also take what I call a genuine wealth or a 5 capital asset accounting approach to looking at an economy or a nation. And so those 5 assets, I have an accounting background, so I was like, okay, I kind of know what I'm talking about. Is that we have human capital. So that includes, our health and our education and all the things that make a human being. There's the second one would be social capital or cultural capital, which includes everything from relationships and trust and belonging, these kind of subjective aspects. And then you have some cultural aspects, which are particularly important to First Nations. The third one would be natural assets, so land and resources and air and water. And then built capital, infrastructure, housing, that would be in that built asset account. And then we have course, the financial or economic capital. Now, these 5 capitals kind of talk to one another on the balance sheet, and there's a relationship. I mean, the human capital component it has a relationship with the financial capital, which has a relationship with, say, housing. And so I designed that system that it would, I know it sounds really boring because I'm coming at this from just an accounting perspective. And I'm saying right now we're operating without a balance sheet. We're operating without those assets properly accounted for on the provincial or, say, government of Canada's balance sheet. So that's why I marry the GPI, which is this kind of income statement, revised income statement, with this 5 asset balance sheet model.
Yeah, and what strikes me is that an accounting model like this, or an approach in general, like what you're talking, or let's say advocate, at the very least, considering well-being metrics and trying to discover how to measure those and perpetuate yourself in such a way that those are increased. But we're talking again, we're talking almost macro economics, big countries, entire GDPs of Canada, the United States. The Pembina Institute I know is going to be associated with that Pembina geology, so that entire region around, I don't know, what is that, Wyoming and those places, right? That whole economic structure there. But can't this be scaled down to, like, I mean, I know you've worked in specific communities, and I want to say Vegreville, but that's not right. Somewhere up north,
Valley View, 1,800
right?
People, little old
in just that
View.
little town, right? So it can be scaled down to something like that, but It doesn't always have to be civic or couldn't it be an association or a workplace or something
or business? So I've developed this model. Yes, I'm a macroeconomist, so I could do it for China as much as I can do it for a local cafe. So same model. Now, will the local cafe on White Avenue in Edmonton want to use my model? Probably not, because small business will know, for example, that their customer relationship is their most important asset, right?
So it's not always weighted the same.
No, so you have a kind of a nesting, like the Russian doll nesting of accounting systems. So, and it starts first with the individual. So my assessment tools start with the individual. So you self-assess your well-being and the well-being of your household, and then well-being of your block or neighborhood, and then your well-being of, right? So this is how the accounting structure works, because economy means household management, household stewardship. So I always begin with what's the building block of the economy? The household, right?
Yeah.
The household may have someone who, like me, my wife and I own our own company. So we have a household. We also have a corporation, right? And our children I call them we're their care holders, right? Until they're old enough to pay for their own way. So this is my view of economics, is like you measure the well-being as experienced at that scale, and then you start to scale out. Okay, so I could scale out to China. It's just the question of, like, then you get into issues of, well, how many people should we be serving, right, in a well-being assessment?
Okay.
So in Valley View, 1,800 people, right? So let's say you have 1,500 adults. So we design a survey tool. People fill out my survey. They self-assess their well-being. That goes into a big Excel spreadsheet. It tells us something about perceptual well-being across age, gender, income, education. Now we've got amazing data. So I got mental, physical, emotional, and even spiritual well-being indicators that people have told us about themselves. Okay. So I'm not asking them opinion questions. I don't care about your opinion about the economy or climate change, or how do you feel about those aspects of your life?
Yeah.
How are things going? What do you love about where you live? Open-ended question. So this is kind of the data I'm collecting. And so a town of Valley View hires me. And it's like, well, this is kind of a cool idea. So you're tiny. You're like 2,000 people. Nothing. You're not like Edmonton, like 1 million people.
Yeah.
And I said, it doesn't matter how small or big you are. I'm going to apply the same well-being accounting protocols at any scale. And it could be in the workplace too. Now, would a business person want the kind of accounting system I'm proposing? Probably most wouldn't, because they're so busy just trying to keep the lights on, right?
Isn't there a sustainability aspect to it, though? You know what I mean? Or an increased productivity? Like, to be honest with you, I work what I consider to be a demanding job. I'm in that class of people that needs to be at the kind of beck and call of my job. Mm-hmm. And am increasingly resentful about their privilege, if I can. Yeah. And I know I'm also the type of personality that I know there's a possibility that some people from work are listening. I don't care. You know what I mean? They know that I'm that guy. You know what I mean? I'll say it. I don't give a damn. And they know it, and I do push back, but I'm a grown ass man and I can do that. I'm also one of the senior guys. So in that sense, I also do kind of have that privilege to kind of say, look, man, you can't just grind me out. But, it doesn't feel sustainable. We're all in the tail end of COVID here.
Yeah. It's been a hard
what
year.
Feels like the tail end.
Yeah.
And how is it not like my antenna work good. I know that people just in general are burnt out.
Yeah,
period.
Absolutely.
It's just people are burnt out. I don't need an assessment. There's no metrics for it or whatever. If there is, it doesn't matter. People are burnt out. It's a subjective thing. It's subjective. It makes it real.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so
I agreed with you.
It's just, and it's not sustainable, right? It just isn't.
Yeah. But you make a good point. It's like, I always go back to, so why did we decide that measuring GDP was the best thing for all economies of the world, except for the communist countries, which just ignored it? Like, you think about it, China never had GDP accounting. Cuba never had GDP accounting.
I didn't
only the victors, only the Axis powers adopted this universal accounting system. So it's like, why are we still measuring? The war is long over and we're still using the same accounting system. Why is it still important to measure these things? Well, you get all kinds of, and I would ask my business students, if you didn't have to keep financial statements, like, why do you keep financial statements as a business?
Well, I would think two reasons. One is gun to my head, I have to. And
where's the gun?
The second one.
Who holds the gun?
We're in Canada, so the Canadian IRS.
Exactly.
Right? Canada tax.
So that's the point. So to your point, if you didn't have to measure financial, of course you'd be interested in how many customers you have and how happy your customers are. And the employer should be concerned about the well-being and happiness of the employees. Absolutely. Otherwise, what do you have? High turnover rates, low customer satisfaction, and eventually your business closes because you weren't paying attention to the most important assets. And that's been my point too. So I'm not saying that businesses would, I would be, I'd have a huge accounting firm by now if everyone actually wanted a well-being or happiness audit. Let's be clear, because no one's beating down my door saying, yeah, we need this happiness audit.
No.
So, but communities are, and because they're curious about, well, how are our citizens doing? Can we demonstrate value for taxes? Right? Big questions. Those are meaningful questions which get me hired. But you're right. Intuitively, we know how hard it's been the last year. We know that, programs like CERB have helped so many Canadians avoid even worse conditions, mental illness, etc. Those are kind of common sense.
Yeah.
So again, it goes back to, why are we measuring? And I'm being rhetorical. I'm saying, I've just come up with an alternative to the system of 7 years of measurement, saying, why are we still measuring this way? And we can measure the things that make life worthwhile, as Kennedy said. We absolutely can. whether we should ask all the questions I'm asking. I, as a data guy, I'm like, they're interesting statistics. I just finished the largest well-being survey of all of Ireland. And it was the largest media outfit in Ireland that hired me.
That's interesting. We have listeners in Ireland. I just did a little bit of a thing for the podcast where I was shouting out names. Port Arlington,
Yeah.
a few places in Dublin. I believe it's Laois is Port Arlington.
Laois.
I don't know how to. Laois.
So we covered, we had both Northern Ireland and the Republic. And we had a fantastic response rate. 2,500 people or so completed my well-being survey, which takes about 6 minutes to complete. So it wasn't the Irish government which asked for the study. It was, a digital media platform, which thought maybe this will just actually increase our readership in the midst of COVID.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I see the angle now. They're doing a well-being story in the midst of COVID. Okay.
I don't know, but man, this is the director of customer relationships. I'm like, yep, that's exactly, you need to, it's cool to understand who your readership is and what they're feeling, right?
So aren't you working on, I think you've alluded to it once or twice in our emails back and forth, and you call it the soul print of well-being. I guess that's your philosophy as it is wrapped up in a serviceable deliverable or whatever, right? This is your kind of, I think like a marketer. So in terms of like a value ladder, like this is your initial steps with me. You can start here. Then if you want to move on, we move up to this level. We move up to that level or something. Right?
Yeah. So that idea came as a result of a couple of trips. I was invited to Singapore 2.5 years ago now by Philip Innes. Philip Innes is the richest man in Singapore. He runs the Far East organization. It's a $40 billion real estate empire.
Oh, wow.
And Singaporeans, they spent a whole year getting ready for me to come over. And so I did I had the privilege of doing a lunch and learn with all of the senior management in the Far East organization. So this is like hotels, hospitals,
Wow.
And Singapore is a small place, but, Philip's a pretty amazing business person. And so I did a lunch and learn on how would you integrate well-being into the workplace? And in the first noon session, and I did a keynote in the famous Fullerton Hotel, which is the iconic former British post office in Singapore, which Philip owns. That's the hotel, and I had some edgy stuff. I said, I talked about how can economics and love go together. It's like, whoa, and they actually engaged me on that. They published the interview I had with one of their media outlets, and it was actually the head of his human resource department, a woman who came up to me and says, this is really interesting what you're talking about. Do you have an individual well-being assessment tool that we might look at? And I said, well, I'm a macroeconomist, but not really. I've sort of dabbled with one, but so I went. As I was flying home, I thought I'm just gonna build this survey tool and build it in Google Forms and just start seeing whether people find it interesting. Mm-hmm. And I based it on the notion of indigenous understanding of the medicine wheel, so mental, physical, emotional, spiritual well-being.
Oh, so you borrowed from that model and just kind of built it out.
Yeah, but of course I'm not, I can't appropriate the culture. I don't really. So, and then what I borrowed from is the science, the so-called science of well-being and happiness. So we've got people like John Helliwell and Jeffrey Sachs who work on the World Happiness Report and looking at the research saying, well, what kind of questions do psychologists ask of people that are relevant to this theme of well-being? So I designed the survey tool. It's like 33 questions or so. And I thought, someone said, well, why don't you call, I work on ecological footprint analysis, which is looking at how you spend your money and how it relates to how much area of land you need. So, and that's called the ecological footprint. So I thought, let's call it the soul print. And it's going to look like this medicine wheel, like a print, but every one of those 30 odd indicators is scored from 1 to 10. So you can then profile all the data of your personal assessment in a radar graph in Excel or what I call a flower graph. So I stylized this Excel graphic option into flower petals. So each petal would be life satisfaction, hope, joy. One of them is belonging, your relationship with money, your feeling, do you make enough money to meet your needs? That's one question. Trust of neighbors, relationship with family. And so there's some pretty, and one of the questions is how much peace do you feel in your soul, right? So I thought I'd call it soul print. Kind of fun.
It is.
And out of that came, so that it was that HR person in Singapore. It kind of inspired me. And then that led to, so then I did I did a presentation at a distributive energy conference, the Rimrock Hotel in Banff.
Okay.
And I blurted out, I'm working on the soul print idea, blockchain maybe. And this young guy, Chris Cervano, who's a blockchain developer in Toronto, came running out in the coffee area and said, what are you working on? And I was like, well, I just, this idea. It's like, I know enough about blockchain now and crypto, and I've been working on a cryptocurrency for the Algonquin in Quebec called the Earth Dollar. And I knew, because I've studied monetary policy forensically and banking. So to know that, well, can I create a nature-backed crypto that is backed by assets, not just like Bitcoin, which is based on gold. Like it's based on the gold model. It's like mining, all the metaphors. It's not based on. So what if I based it on time or well-being? So your digital wallet is full of hours, which is say 700,000 hours is what the average male will live in Alberta. So imagine you're born, you get, your passport has 700,000 hours, right, on it.
Okay.
And no one has the right to tell you how to use those hours. And you'll work about 80,000 hours of paid work, roughly, in your lifetime. And all the other hours will be kind of discretionary. So that idea came to my mind, and I started then working with Chris, and he said, you really need to write a white paper about this, because I will pass it around my colleagues in Toronto, because I think you've got $1 billion idea here. So there's this 28-year-old guy. Now he goes to Dubai, wins third prize for his gray block blockchain technology, which now has landed here in Alberta. So they're going to start using the gray blockchain. Now, I don't know anything about blockchain other than this looks like a cool kind of platform. It fits with my model. It's a form of potential currency, but at the very least, it constitutes an interesting platform for smart contracts that are oriented towards well-being, and where the common unit of exchange is time, hours.
That seems so foreign to me, because so much of blockchain is still in that area of it's being traded as an asset, considered as an asset. Like gold, even other currencies that have different security protocols, or proof of work, proof of stake, completely different architectures.
Yeah,
they're all still being traded like Forex. Yeah.
So fast forward, imagine now I'm back. I'll take you back to Singapore, and I'm at this other session with these Christian business people. I'll just put it that way. And Singapore is an interesting place. It's multi-faith, multicultural. But Philip Inn is actually, he's a Christian. He's a convert, which is interesting in itself. And so I get invited to a forum in which I meet the head of the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Singapore.
Wow.
So Singapore is the largest sovereign wealth fund next to Norway.
Wow.
$240 billion. So I meet him. He's now the outgoing head. And he says, tell me about your model, Mark, Mr. Anielski, in basically 2 flights of stairs up to this session. And I said, 5 capital.
30 seconds. Yeah.
30 seconds, right? You got the elevator pitch.
Yeah.
By the time we hit the top of the stairs, he goes, makes sense. I said, the only thought was, let's try for Singapore then. That evening at a dinner party, I meet Sue Tai, who is the director of FinTech for the Singapore Monetary Authority, who spent 13 years with the U.S. Federal Reserve in San Francisco.
I'm sorry, what's their name, his or her?
Her name is Sue Tai.
Sue Tai.
No, never met her before. She gets introduced to me and she's like, what? So since that first meeting in Singapore, she's proposing that I come to the largest blockchain international conference in Singapore. This was November 2019, I think.
Okay.
And I said, that would be me coming. She says, I think you need to prepare an ICO and come prepared to pitch your idea. I think it'll fly. And I'm like, this is like walking into the Big Short scene, when they go. I said, I am not the ICO guy. I don't even know. It's possible that someone will pay attention and think it's interesting, but I don't think I'm there yet. So we've been sort of waiting to see what is the right opportunity to bring forward this idea.
So, you know what? I'm still having a hard time wrapping my head around what they feel is the potential of what you're talking about. Now, when I resonate with what you're talking about, it's just because I'm interested in well-being characteristics and perpetuating that.
Yeah.
As a Cardano-verse fan, right, to the point of volunteering my time on a microphone on 8 o'clock on a Wednesday or a Thursday, right?
Yeah.
So you could call me a type of raving fan, right? This is that really niche sort of thing where it's that, what do you call that? That unpaid labor, right? This is
but we're having fun in this intellectual sandbox where some people, it is like the Joe Rogan show, right? Some people will go, what did you just say $1 billion idea? Now, what I know is I don't know how to bring it to market. But what I do know is that I know the money creation system. And that's where I want to go with this.
I get that you don't know how to bring it to market. And I do want to go there a little bit, but I'm just not sure what they're proposing that you would be bringing to market. Like, lots of people want to make an ICO and have their coin, and some people want to do it on Cardano. And Cardano is one of the easiest systems to do it on, because they've built the system in such a way to treat these non-native assets as though they were native assets and blah, 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 unlike Ethereum. And there's a whole thing there. But like, I don't know why Singularity.net and their AI ventures need their own coin other than raising money.
That's a good point. So you just nailed what I felt is I'm not convinced that this is about creating yet another alternative coin. We had access to Vitalik Buterin. I was like, would Vitalik understand what I'm talking about? I think so, but I'm talking.
He's a very smart person.
He's super smart, but from my understanding from Chris's world in the blockchain space, he goes 85-90% of everybody in the space is just get rich quick kind of guys. I said, that
seems conservative. I think it's more than that.
It's more, right? So I was like, my motivation isn't to make money out of this thing. In fact, it is to liberate, literally like Neo in the Matrix, is to liberate us from the debt slavery that we're all part of.
Yeah.
Because the movie The Matrix is absolutely my model. I would use that metaphor for my business students for 10 years. I'm like, red pill, blue pill. I'm going to show you how to stand back far enough to understand this Hegelian dialectic, and that we were born into it. We're complicit in it, complicit partly through our ignorance. And how do we leave? And this ties back to Peter Block and Walter Brueggemann and John McKnight, my invitation to Cincinnati. As Walter Brueggemann, the Old Testament scholar, said, how do we leave Egypt? How do we leave the slavery of a system that we've been part of for at least 200 years? With the creative ideas we have now, right? And the youthful ideas, the blockchain world. And the only way I see out of it is to reestablish the creation of money relative to, let's say, well-being and actual, you could say, sovereignty over your time. Because right now, all of us are mortgaged. The word mortgage means a death pledge.
Yeah.
Your
French.
time, the moment you're born, you are bonded in the real sense. Your time is actually not your own. And that's what I'm talking. This is a big chess move. This is a huge strategic, and this will free Africa. This will free all of us. And I've been senior advisor to China. I know it will also mean that China will, not because I agree with the Chinese system, the Communist Party, but if China could make this move, Jack Ma with Alibaba could make this move. This is the big strategic stuff I'm talking. I have connections to all these people, like in weird ways. Now,
didn't they get rid of Jack Ma though? Like, isn't he not been seen from? Like, we all kind of hope he's like, somebody please give us a sign, give us a thumbs up.
Him. A new young friend in London actually works for him now. She's fluent in Mandarin, English. No, he's alive.
Alive and well.
And he's working on something interesting. If you listen to his discussion with Elon Musk and from Shanghai, he says that the new business algorithm is IQ plus EQ equals LQ. And Elon's looking at him going, and he says, Jack Ma says, why do you want to go to Mars? I want to deliver LQ, which is, he says, is love quotient, the new algorithm for why people want to work, right? Even in an AI world. So I'm like, wait a minute, if Jack Ma has redefined or defined this algorithm, and Philip in Singapore defines the core value of his company as love, which he says is the concern for the well-being of the other. I couldn't believe it. That's his core value, love. I'm like, then the West better pay attention to what's going on in Asia.
Oh, you know what, sir? I'm that triggers my skepticism. It really does. Like I get it that sometimes I'm not an Elon hater. Like lots of people, like Elon's getting a lot of hate lately, and there's sort of this mistrust to him. I think he's genuine. Maybe I'm an idiot. Jack Ma, I think is probably a reasonable dude. I don't see how he's not just kind of lucky. This guy in Singapore, whom I don't know, when I hear stuff like that, though, it's just kind of like, I don't know, man. I'm kind of like, are you really? And I know that that's maybe my own just sort of my own skepticism and pessimism or something like that. But it just seems.
See, the thing that,
am I wrong there? It seems unrealistic.
The thing that people, when I first got invited to China, I was asked to advise them on something that the West has never heard of. It's called the Xiaokang economic strategy, which was Deng Xiaoping's idea from 1979. So imagine 8 years after Nixon comes to visit, they adopt a national economic policy called Xiaokang. Xiaokang is a Confucian word. It actually means well-being, so that the average Chinese person would have a moderately well-off lifestyle. I was like, so our cynical side would say, that's ridiculous. Who have you ever seen a CBC documentary on Xiaokang? No. So they hire a Westerner like me to come and develop their Xiaokang well-being indicator system for all the cities of China. Now, under Communist Party, you can impose the edict that every mayor of every city will use the same suite of indicators that help them develop. Now, that's never going to happen in Canada. Unlikely. So you say, well, all right, well, that's under communist, I don't trust the communist system. And that's a fair, there's a fair critique of that. So I hear your cynicism. The other thing we forget is, when I went there, like I would go there for like 1 day meetings, ridiculous, fly all the way 13 hours.
5,000.
And have a 2-hour meeting with multiple translation, right?
Oh, yeah.
But
I never thought of that.
But they trusted me so much, they actually would send draft chapters of my first book to Hu Jintao, the president. It's like, what?
Wow.
And believe me, hardly anyone knew I was going there. I mean,
well, it is interesting. China, they do their research. You know what I mean? It's kind of become a meme now. Do your research.
Yeah.
Because of what we're living in socially. But China does their research and people don't know.
So,
China does research.
So the important thing that I often try to, and I know people say, oh, you're so romantic about it. Like, you're so naive about China. It's like, no, think about this. In 1795, the British came to Hong Kong, right? The British came to the Emperor Qianlong of the Qing dynasty, which is the last dynasty, right?
Okay.
The last empire. And they said, the Emperor said, what? He was a great general and he was a Taoist by practice. And China's always governed in Confucian kind of philosophy, but Taoism is their kind of spiritual foundation. And he basically said, why are you here? He said, we want a free trade with you. He said, well, we have enough stuff. Like, we don't need your stuff. Basically, I'm paraphrasing, right?
Yeah.
And what did they do? They turned around and started the Opium War with them, which ended up destroying the Chinese empire. And so I'm like looking at this thinking, this is interesting. So the Chinese have long memories. The British came and destroyed their empire. And then, of course, we had Mao and all that and communism, but that's a blip in a 5,000-year storyline. So you have this ancient civilization, that's the longest sustained civilization, who actually end up adopting Abraham Lincoln's monetary policy ideas. I'm jumping a bit because the nationalist Shanghai Shek, who he actually was schooled in Hawaii, and he studied Abraham Lincoln's monetary model, which basically Lincoln said, money should be created for the people by the people.
Greenbacks. Didn't he do greenbacks?
Greenbacks. And that's how Lincoln won the Civil War, right? Now, he was also killed because he went against the banking powers in Europe who tried to blackmail Lincoln. So I'm like, wait a minute. So China, are you saying China adopted a president's monetary policy, which is going to eventually outflank the West's own kind of debt money system if they play it right, and they have long memories. So as I was sitting there going, these guys are playing chess. They're playing a long game.
Yeah, they remind me of there's an author who's kind of popular nowadays, Simon Sinek.
Yeah.
And he's got that thing that he stole from someone he admires of infinite games versus finite games.
The infinite
China's playing infinite game, and they just sort of always are. And then they don't tell you that that's what they're doing.
Exactly.
They've got 5,000-year-old gold charts, is my understanding, like charting the price of gold for 5,000 years.
Yeah. Now, I would say that because I actually have taught at Harbin, I've taught business students in Harbin, which is where their space program is out of and all that. And I would debate with them. These are 21-year-olds. I'm like, you don't understand your spiritual history. Like, you don't understand your doubt. Like, I've read Lao Tzu and I've read The Art of War. I've read, I've done a little bit of that homework. And I was like, but you don't understand your deep mystical traditions. And so you can't forget that. Your great emperors were always, they were trying to be practical Taoists, right? And yet Confucian, because Confucian is very practical in its approach to governance. The West is like, we're like drunken sailors. We're no different than we were from 200 years ago when we arrived on their shore, in a way.
We've got proof of it in the way we handle the pandemic. You know what I mean? It's the exact same as it was 100 years ago. No. We've got photographic evidence that nothing's changed.
So all I'm trying to paint you, Dallas, a picture of my view of the world and saying, all right, so what I'm talking about is a well-being based monetary system that actually, the only country that I could see it could actually adopt it full scale is China.
Well, the crazy thing is China's such a power. You would understand that more as a macroeconomics trained person, but we all know that China has the balls to call U.S. a paper tiger. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
and the U.S. just kind of had to say, well, yeah, shut up. You know what I mean?
So geopolitically, I know that all this debt money is just a fiction. It's just a digit on a computer, and we can change that algorithm any day we want. We could forgive all of it like the Sumerian civilizations did. They forgave debts every 7 years. We have never forgiven our debts. And under COVID, we just added more debt to the pile.
Yeah.
And so like we could stroke it all away. We could just say, reboot the system.
But don't they own now? Again, I actually got this from trying to study questions for you coming up, and I know a little bit of it from when I got maybe around 2008 is when things were crashing. I sort of started getting interested in that was like the flare up of the first sort of Austrian economics that came into the thing with the gold. Here's the history of the gold standard and stuff. And, it became part of a social media thing. Yeah. So that's when I became as familiar as I am with it. But you started talking about specifically 1973 is when governments made the choice that private entities were able to.
That's right. So they met in Basel, Switzerland, Trudeau and other leaders, and the Bank for International Settlements in Basel, which is the central bank's bank or club. And I think it was 73 or 74. They collectively made a decision that Western governments could sell their debt to private banks, as opposed to selling it to the central bank, which is our bank. It's a big difference.
Selling it to the central bank sounds more along the lines of what Abraham Lincoln or maybe Jefferson or somebody would have wanted. That's
right. Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, they all talked about in that language, right? Because they wanted the Revolutionary War was to decouple from the bank, from the English banks. That people don't understand that either. Americans certainly don't understand. That's why they fought the war. In my opinion, that's why they fought the war, because they were under the British yoke of their banking system.
So just establish their own bank. And so in 1973, the decision collectively was made that what I call just private interests were able to buy up what should be sovereign debt. Am I using the right terminology here? Sovereign debt. And then that kind of makes it harder to do the whole we could forgive this debt thing, because it's owned by someone. Like if it was me, like, you're not going to forgive this debt.
No.
I own 20 billion of this debt.
Pension. It's in my pension fund, right? Even worse, like, what do you mean you're going to tear up that bond? You're going to just, that's part of my fixed income stream and whatever. I mean, so that's the interesting part of this is that we all are holding pieces of this federal debt or provincial debt in some way. But, if the debt was just held by the central bank, which we own, then it's a circular argument. We're just paying interest to ourselves. So, and furthermore, before 73, if you looked at the record, there were hardly any years in which deficits were incurred. But suddenly deficits started running up like massively after 74.
Weird.
And so that meant that the government, the only way to balance the budget was to sell debt, to sell bonds, to issue bonds and sell them. And of course, when they went to Switzerland, they agreed they could sell them to the private markets.
So it doesn't seem like there's much of a resolution there. And it's tough to say that I would want one. Like I just yesterday, we're doing this recording now. Yesterday, I did a recording with my own personal financial guy who is a life insurance guy. And the whole episode's about mutual company life insurance, dividend paying whole life insurance, which my understanding was started by Benjamin Franklin. The very origins of that was Benjamin Franklin, and like whenever he was the first mutual company, anyways. And so, but these investments that these mutual insurance companies make is 40% is bonds.
Good point.
Right.
Yeah.
So to default on that, I lose 40% of my money. And like you said, retirees, I suppose in Canada, mutual funds, whatever that American equivalent is that they use for retirements over there, all that, the 401k, is that what they call it?
401k, yeah.
all obliterated under debt forgiveness. Am I wrong? Or would we just buy it back? Like, would the solution be our own central banks start issuing a currency and then buying it back?
That's correct. I mean, people don't, I've been watching the CERB money, the COVID bailout, right, of Canadians. And I think I've pointed out on LinkedIn some articles, like 500 billion was created out of thin air.
Is that globally?
Over the last 12 months.
That's globally.
No, Canada.
What?
500 billion. Now,
we don't have that
from
much.
1974, you've just situated 1974. So now we have this, the government Canada starts selling bonds because the deficit finance. So the accumulated debt from 1974 to 2019, before COVID hit, was $750 billion. Took that long to get to $750 billion outstanding, owing to the markets who hold that debt.
Wow.
So in 2020, 530 billion new bonds were issued to pay for CERB. And how come there's no debate about this on CBC? It's like, hello, you just added in 12 months all this debt.
Yeah.
And then, okay, so the next question, as I've asked the Comptroller of Alberta, who bought the bonds? All the markets buy the bonds. I said, it's not good enough. Dallas's name is on the McDonald's invoice, even in a drive-through.
Mm-hmm. You
can't tell me an anonymous market bought. Well, that's how it works. I said, I'm sorry, that's not good enough an answer. So I looked. I said, so let's look at the Bank of Canada. Did the Bank of Canada buy the bonds? Or how much of it did they buy? They bought a huge amount, probably 80% of those. I call them COVID bonds. And why so much? Probably because the markets couldn't absorb that much in one bite.
There
what does that
be that
mean?
much demand.
If the Bank of Canada buys the bonds, they can, and because we own the bank, we're just going to pay interest to ourselves, right?
Yeah.
And that's a good thing. So that's great news, because that's like a war that just lasted for 12 months, and you then decided once the war's over, you just write it off. Just paper anyways, right? Just created the bond, sold it to our own bank. It was necessary to save Canadians from whatever disaster. And yeah, we spent the money, all right. $2,000 a month was probably just enough. It's kind of like a happiness wage. It's not fantastic, but it'll get us through.
It got people through, yeah.
Got a lot of people through, right? So thank goodness Canada did that move. But my point is, we just demonstrated that the central bank can return to the role of purchasing government debt, but only if governments actually are poor fiscal managers. Like, there's no reason why governments should run deficits, in my opinion.
Because they could run that off
they
if
don't
they
need
needed to, in case of emergency.
That's right. And of course, the other piece of that is, well, how much interest payment is on the $750 billion that preceded COVID?
Yeah.
It's a big number. It's a large percentage of your annual taxes. And we're like, well, you don't see that in your tax bill. You don't see that 20% of your tax bill is interest payments on debt that is owed to the private sector.
Private banking sector. It's not even
private bank.
I wouldn't mind if it was owed to you. It's owed to some faceless, super rich banker that I.
But then the paradox is, part of my CPP, part of my
interwound in the whole economy
is interwound. So you're like, are you going to take away everything? Like you're pulling everything back. And I'm like, I know it's complicated. So the strategy has to be a slow progressive repatriation of that debt.
Yeah. So in thinking how, because this is a Cardano podcast, and I'm willing to talk about literally anything other than Cardano too. But I truly don't care. I'll talk about anything.
We can talk about Cardano. We can do like a product, whatever, endorsement.
I'm thinking, like, what can blockchain do in a company, in a nation like Africa or something like that? What can a digital accounting ledger model do to prevent this or help draw us away? Because this is becoming, I mean, it is COVID. This is the reality of it, right? I don't want to say it's pessimistic, because that has like moral, like you're just being a pessimist, and that's not what I'm saying.
Oh, yeah, no.
It's real. There was 500 billion printed.
500 billion is real. It was absolutely necessary. Every country, I'm sure every country is in a similar boat, maybe
or worse, yeah,
or worse, right? We haven't tallied up how much new debt was created worldwide.
Yeah,
no idea yet.
So it is kind of bleak, and it feels ominous. And it's not that I don't mind leaving on an ominous note or anything, but that doesn't feel like the whole story.
For me, it's not ominous. It's full of hope, because I've just told you that it points to the fact that as sovereign nations, we could create our own money for the people, by the people. We can issue living wage bonds. We issuing green bonds now, right? Governments are papering green bonds to do what? To deal with climate change or carbon liabilities. So we could start, as nations, start to get really creative about creating well-being bonds. Just paper.
Yeah.
But it means we reclaim the sovereignty, the rightful sovereignty, as Benjamin Franklin and Jefferson said, right? Over the creation of money for the people, by the people.
Yeah.
And people say, well, that will just lead to corruption. I mean, the Bank of Canada was only created in 1933.
I didn't know that.
Before that, the de facto central bank of Canada was the Bank of Montreal.
I didn't know that.
And I just read that. You can read it on Wikipedia. It's like, so the early days, it was the same kind of anxiety. It was like the conservatives running the show. It was like, well, we can't trust a government central bank, right? Because Bank of Montreal, they're masters at money. So it's like, fine. So it took a few years for them to kind of transition to a central Bank of Canada public bank model. Now, I don't care if it's Rwanda, Nigeria, I would say the same thing. For years, you've been colonized by the West. You're beholden to the IMF and the World Bank, who all enslaved you in their debt model, which was brilliant. I mean, right? And you said, well, okay, we'll finance your infrastructure and your dams, but then you'll owe us forever.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, you can kind of give them the finger if you want. Like, forget London, forget them. Reclaim your own sovereignty over the creation of money based on the assets of Rwanda or Nigeria, or I don't care where it is, Zimbabwe. And that's what I've said to them boldly. And they're like, are you afraid? Are you afraid to move? Are you afraid to call the bluff of the monster? Because the monster has no teeth left. And I can show you how to do this. And it's not an act of war. It's an act of courage, vision, and practicality. Because money is just a figment, it's a creation of our imagination. And the ancient cultures, if you study Sumerian Babylonian culture, they're the ones who gave the Jews the Jubilee Law. They had very sophisticated systems of debt forgiveness and redistribution of wealth. Because they understood in mathematics, they understood compound interest. These ancient cultures. And we have probably not practiced any of their economics since Rome. So we got 2,000 plus years of thinking about what if we had the Sumerian model today.
Yeah.
And all I'm saying is, like, I'm not talking fiction here. That system existed.
Yeah. So
that's it. That's my whole like shtick. It's like, so what's the next question? Well, are I going to hear all these buts? Well, we can't. It's like they're all excuses.
Yeah.
Do what China did. Do what Samaria did. Or just test it out in a spreadsheet. Play it out in some scenario, some algorithm on your Excel spreadsheet, and see what happens. See whether you can actually pay a living wage. You You can do all those things. You can create money to do whatever you wanted to do.
Well, and the thing that strikes me, and what I've been thinking of the last couple of days, especially since we started back and forth on this latest email chain, is what can we do to deploy these type of strategies on the small sort of level? Because Cardano is in this stage of its own growth, where it's just this sort of grassroots community of like people, like literally people just on the Discord, trying to get things up and off the ground, and people in the background trying to develop it, and it's coming along. It's one of the criticisms against Cardano. They call it a ghost chain, right? So you don't really have, you don't have deployed assets yet, blah, 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 blah. And, that's some of that, the people really into it will rally against that argument. And here's why you're wrong and stuff like that, like the big time CEOs and stuff like that. But, it still is not fully deployed, right? It's always in development. And my thoughts were, isn't there a way of not, because like your solution of providing your service, I mean, obviously you have your own job and your consultancy service, but there's got to be a way to sort of deploying or self-assessing or doing like a census. We just did the census in Alberta, on a small level. If any organization wanted to do their own census without having, I don't want to say don't hire you, because I don't want to say don't pay Mark for his job, but you know what I mean? But like you can only do so much.
I'm an open
What
source.
if you had 10,000 people ask you, right?
I'm an open
That'd be great, but it'd also be terrible.
But my model is open source. I appreciate the value of that open source idea or ideology. I'm busy enough. Like people who are serious will call me, and I get excited when the chief of Opasquik and the PA calls me after reading my book and said, I think we really need your help. And I said, and here's a former military sniper from Canadian Forces who's the chief.
Oh, really?
And he knows war, and he knows how to move. And he says, if they don't see a legitimate fence, there's no fence, right? And I'm like, there's no fence. There's nothing stopping you from adapting all of the ideas in my book. And it might take a while. It might take 2 or 3 years.
Lots of resistance, probably.
But we'll get there. Most of the resistance internally, not believing that it can be. I was like, so he brings me in the community. Stand up and tell them how London does it. I'm like, this is how London does it. This is how London's been doing it for 250, 300 years. You can do it too. You can play the same game, and I'll show you how. And if you don't think your accountants are up to the task, get a new accounting firm.
Yeah, I just wonder, is there a way to deploy this on a sort of automated, like it's tough to say just as an app.
It is.
But is there a way to do this? Because like Cardano has a venture capital arm.
Yeah.
Right? Decentralized. That's how I first got into podcasting, was interacting with that audience, right? Yeah. Of the venture capital management, supposed to be decentralized, right? And voted for by ADA holders, right? Matter of fact, the voting's going on right now as we speak for this recording. It'll be over probably by the time this is published, but you know what I mean? For Fund 4. And then there's another fund. And then Fund 6 is going to be $4 million total. And it's just going to keep increasing and increasing and increasing and increasing, to the tune of like, I think they want to do 15 million per fund, but I'm not sure. But anyways,
I hear what you're saying. I think my friend Chris is saying the same thing right now. There's lots of money looking for interesting ideas, right? And what I'm saying is Cardano, I'm happy to work in the sense of, I don't actually care who, like someone go forward, someone just experiment, pilot, just play with the model. If it doesn't work perfectly, of course it won't work perfectly the first time, but I've got an assessment tool. I mean, I've got about 5,000 people who've taken the survey now from my different projects. So I've got a lot of data to say, now, will my idea of it could be called anything. You don't have to call it soul print blockchain. You can call it whatever, well-being blockchain or, can it hunt? Can it work? I think so. But I'm also realist and know that it will require a lot of tweaking. And so I'm working with, people in the creative monetary policy space, right? Local currency stuff, which I don't think will ultimately work very well because you're just tinkering. You're like, it's fine to Calgary dollars, things like that, but the uptake isn't big enough. The scale isn't. So we got to think, how do we scale this thing like in a way that will just like a public blockchain where everyone has sovereignty over their own assets and time. I don't even know what that looks. I don't even think we're ready for that yet. In terms of, going back to the very beginning of the conversation, are we mature enough to?
No, people would not. I can't
example,
say that I am.
If I had a magic wand, I would. If I eliminated all the debt that now we're spending at least 50% of our weekly wages on hidden interest charges, and I gave every Alberta a 2.5 day work week instantly.
Jesus.
Right. Jesus. Exactly. Would that ruin your life? It would probably be really challenge. I mean, COVID is a good teacher. Right? It's like,
no. Do I get to keep the same amount of money?
Yes. In fact,
no, it would not ruin my life. Are you kidding?
Because
I make decent money, but I work like a mule.
What I've been able to calculate, no economists do this, is like calculate the actual interest costs in your McDonald's hamburger, in your wherever it is, your gas and because all of that money that's going into paying for those services is actually came from debt, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
debt servicing so much.
I'm saying make money a public utility. If you make money a public utility, as if like water coming to your tap, you reduce the work week. Even without AI, you've reduced the work week by half, because half of your work week is going to pay for hidden interest charges by bank-created money. And I'm not saying get rid of the banks either. I'm just saying that would change fundamentally our work week.
Yeah.
And we'd have 20 hours of discretionary time. And you're like, well, what would you do with 20 hours a week?
I got 20 hours of overtime, not discretionary time. I'm not joking. It's really much like that, 20 hours overtime.
And so I say, let's play it out. And again, we can model it in the comfort of our spreadsheets, or we can kind of do a tapered and eased in strategy, right?
Okay, so let's try to end on something of the idea of solutions, something on the idea of, say, actionable first steps also, and then that will lead to some type of plug of here's how we staying connected with Mark. You can mention you have your own podcast and where to look you up, and your books and all that stuff too, which all of that stuff will be in the show notes too, right? When I publish. But well,
the best thing about being on your podcast is I get to talk versus I get to listen to my brilliant guests. So thank you for having me on and talking about that. It's rare that we get to talk this long about substantive issues.
It feels like we barely scratched the surface, and I'm lucky in this conversation that I'm so unacquainted with the fullness of your subject matter, so that, because I believe also my audience is, right? So yeah, I feel like a good representative of saying what.
But it's fair. I mean, when Peter Block invited me to Cincinnati, I mean, that's how I got to, actually he came to a money conference we held in Claremont, California, the Claremont School of Theology, actually, with my mentor, John Cobb, who's now 96. And Peter was blown away. He was like, oh my God, like, you guys are so smart. And like, we don't know anything about money. And it's like, I'm sitting, he says, I'm sitting at the feet of, like, I'm not a master, but invite me to Cincinnati, put me up at your place. And so he invited me, and they started this project called the Jubilee Project. It's like, Jubilee, that's like the Jews, right? Debt forgiveness. I'm like, and can you teach us, similar to your question, can you teach us how to become each other's bankers? I was like, I could try. Let's try, right? And can we create a community development fund that is going to build affordable housing for poor African American families, based on the habitat model, like very practical things, right?
Yeah.
Had those discussions, developed the system, had it ready to go, right? Ready to go. And then what happens? I go home, I go back to Edmonton, and things get slippery, right? There's like vested interest. No, we know what this guy's up to. He's taken from our cookie jar. We're the investment bankers for Christchurch Cathedral or whoever would probably put money into this fund that would actually alleviate poverty within literally 10 years in Cincinnati. And so those are the barriers we face. It's not like we don't have practical, interesting solutions. And I'm a pragmatist. It's like on the ground, like I could say, well, as an individual, get rid of, eliminate debt in your life. What if you did? What if you have no mortgage payments? What do you have? You have discretionary time.
Yeah.
Start your own business. Everyone should have a corporation. We're all corporations anyways, right? Do that, little pieces like that. So definitely get out of debt if you can, because you're free then. You have more discretionary time, which is what I'm saying, what I'm benefiting from being debt free for the last 15 years is what I would like to see my neighbors also experience. And I'm not stupid to think that we'll just eliminate all that private debt overnight and give you the 20 hours off a week. It's not going to happen that fast. No. But then we need these different kind of strategies. We need different kind of investment funds that are oriented towards well-being. Those are all the things. I'm working on so many fronts, and it's like,
I believe you.
I'm not saying I have all the solutions, but I'm attracting people, merchant bankers, whatever, who are like, what you're doing is so cool, I want to play in the sandbox. Or they say, you're the most dangerous man on Wall Street. If I took you to Wall Street, they'd eat you alive.
Yeah.
Because they don't want what you're proposing. Absolutely. Of course they don't want that. No. They run the matrix, and I get that. So in the art of war, how do we behave? How do we move?
Well, and my understanding of the art of war in a way oversimplified matter, like, because it talks about a lot of stuff, but really the true war is a war of information.
Yes.
Right. So
that's it.
That's where I was, and that's where I was coming to, just as you were saying it too, because like, it feels like a lot of those macro issues we can't do much about, but what we can do is starting at the ground level of, like I said, if we all start paying a little bit of attention, and when I say we all, I mean literally me, because I'm the only one that I can even
yeah, exactly.
do anything.
Me, right?
Yeah. To even just saying, you know what, well-being metrics are something that I'm into. This is something that I'm going to start to try to evaluate my life with, as opposed to I got a rich friend, I got a rich uncle. I don't have their money, so I'm not going to evaluate my life compared to my rich uncle in St. Albert and my rich friend in Calgary. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
But I have other rich friends who are, have multiple divorces and thankfully, no cocaine habit or something. But you know what I mean? Like, so if I can start to evaluate and design is not the right word. I don't want to make it like it's an empowerment thing or a real get your nose to the grindstone type of thing, but evaluate my life and facilitate my life in such a way as around perpetuating well-being. And if I have an influence, maybe I have an influence with a podcast, maybe I'm a business owner or something like that, maybe I can start to have these well-being metrics leak into my culture, right? And start it from there. And it's that sort of groundswell of movement that will face a lot of resistance from the establishment and the status quo. You already see it as people bark back at millennials, right? But millennials are quitting $150,000, $200,000 Google jobs because they're like, this is bullshit.
It's
and I'm totally burnt out. And Google's like, what are you talking about? There's a ball. We have a ball pit. Come play in our ball pit in Silicon Valley or something stupid. And they're like, but I work 80 hours a week.
Dallas is happening even amongst the young Chinese that I was teaching, right? They would admit to me, it's like, we want what you have in the West. I said, what do you want? You want to travel, right? Of course you want to travel. You want to take nice photographs. You want the Land Rover. And then we go out dancing, and these are 21-year-olds. And they said, but Professor, we have no ghost. I said, what do you mean ghost? What is that ghost?
I don't know.
We have no spirituality. We think this is it. The material things are the only thing that defines the aspiration of our lives. I'm like, no. Like, you have rich spiritual traditions.
They just don't know.
They don't know. They have, they're caught up right now in this kind of, I said, you're just caught up in the same addiction, whatever you want to call it, obsession that we have been in the West. I said, don't blow your culture. Don't blow your traditions. I mean, it's fine to aspire to have a certain income and lifestyle as we've enjoyed in the West. But if China stops and takes a pause and goes, like the old emperor, we got enough stuff. We produced enough shit for Walmart. Like, we're done. We're done, right? And that would change the entire global trade model. Not as a trade war, to say, let's look at what we can produce in Canada. That's the trade model that Adam Smith wrote about. And that's my point, is like, I'm just saying, read, get educated. Don't take my word for it. But do your own homework and come to your own conclusions. Some people will get pissed off, angry. I can't believe I was hoodwinked my whole life. It was a big lie. It's like, I know some people will respond that way, but think about the things I'm saying as a position of hope, right? And not ridiculous. I'm not being flip about this stuff. I want to make sure that these things actually are practical and grounded.
Yeah, and I know Peter Block is moving in that direction under the umbrella of trying to establish a different narrative from the consumer culture that we live in, right? So if we can move away from such a dominant consumer culture into something more like a well-being culture. And like I said, the only things that we seem to be able to really at the ground level do something about is just changing that narrative.
Yeah.
And that's why I started this podcast at the very beginning. It's how I got Peter on board within 10 episodes to be on the show, even though I make stupid jokes about flat earth and stuff like this. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm just being goofy on my podcast. But the reason I got away with that is because I'm trying to have conversations about what's important within this new ecosystem of the Cardano blockchain, right? Which seems so radically different from the rest.
Yeah.
Right. And trying to have important conversations with someone such as yourself. And I've got a few other highly interesting people that are coming up and have already had, and enthusiasts and professionals and amateurs and all of it. And we're obviously super stoked to have you here. We could probably keep going on for another semester or two towards trying to figure stuff out. But why don't we got to say, you've obviously got your own social media and probably your main channels of how people get a hold of you. If people want to work with you in some sort of consultancy form like this, how can they get a hold of you?
I have a very simple last name, Anielski at gmail.com. Anielski.com is my website, my new refurbished website. And I actually like LinkedIn. I find it a useful platform for expressing opinions and writing short opinion editorials or throwing up some graphs. And so it's an interesting platform because I get pretty immediate response. Like either, if I say weird things like, the relationship between glyphosate and cancer, it's like a leper. It's like nobody touches it. And then you throw out some happiness stuff and people love it, right? So it's like Facebook that way. Yeah. But I do find that platform quite interesting, and that's where I'm getting a lot of my professional kind of connections. And people that's how I got the Irish gig.
Just found you on LinkedIn. Okay, so
and then just text me and like, can we talk, or can I be on your podcast, whatever it is, right? It's like, can we connect? And I like it because people, I assume, are professionally interested. That's why they reach out, right?
Mm-hmm. So yeah, obviously you have a podcast too. What is the name of your?
And I have a podcast on which is I always get it wrong, the Economy of Wellbeing podcast,
Okay.
and it's on all the platforms, Spotify and Apple and Google.
Obviously, we'll have links to all that.
Yeah, so I invite. I've got tons of about 85 guests now over the last 2.5 years. Some pretty robust conversations about this whole spectrum. Peter's been on my show, Walter Brueggemann.
Interesting. So,
and I think to your point is like, I always believe that the answers to all our questions are in the circle. So like, where's the space where we talk about these things? That's what Peter Block did so well, I thought, in Cincinnati. Is like they organized those spaces for conversation, which were, focused on pragmatic things we can do.
Mm-hmm. I think he calls it convening.
I find that encouraging. Yeah, convening. Yeah, and as John McKnight said, the answers are in the neighborhood. The assets are in the neighborhood. They're on your block, right? Mm-hmm. That's what's so important about their work.
I'm starting to consider, and I'm working towards this in my future interviews, the Cardano staking pool system as digital neighborhoods. Yeah, because, well, there's a possibility there. It's not happening yet because we live in that consumer model of just a service that's provided by a customer. But there's a possibility of differentiating. But that's really just me spitballing, honestly.
That's good.
I think it has potential. I'm going to talk to a stake pool operator this weekend. But anyways.
Definitely.
Well, yeah, I'm having a hard time wrapping this up because I almost don't want to, and I don't know how to stop it. But thank you for being here. I always want to leave my podcasts on a what is your grand vision of the future? But with you, it might be a little bit too big. You know what I mean?
My big grand vision, which I've written now, is called the Charter of Love, or my third book, if I have one, is something to do with the civilization of love, or the economy of love, which has been on my heart for many years, probably since the first time I went. I went to Jerusalem in '92, and you say, well, love, like, so. During COVID, I had fun. I just took the Magna Carta and the Declaration of Independence in the U.S. and I started to play with the words and see if you put love in certain places, what would it sound like? What would it read like? And it's pretty interesting. People are like, that's awesome. And it took me like an hour or something to do it. But I thought, well, this could be the platform upon which, in that language of platform, you start to build, because once you become, if you say, we find these things self-evident.
Yeah.
All men, women, and children are created in the image of love. It's like, what? What did he say? It's like, how can love be pragmatic? It's like, because Philip Inn told me how. He said, love is a concern for the well-being of the other. All right, now let's unpack this. Let's build this whole economic operating model based on some of these principles of mutuality, right? So again, a very high conscious document called the Declaration of Independence can be actually reimagined. And then this is the question of, well, let's backcast. Let's look at our current system and see the incongruity of our current system with those revised aspirations, right?
Yeah.
So that's what I'm working on because I do like large scale strategic planning and business planning. I'm always thinking about what's your mission statement? What are your principles, right? What are the laws that govern your society? On
a small scale or even a super large scale. Yeah.
Or large scale. I don't care if it's a First Nation of 200 people in Comox in Vancouver Island or, a million people in Edmonton. And as Jefferson, I'll close with this reflection. Thomas Jefferson said, without virtue, happiness cannot be.
Cardano citizen. Cardano Citizen, Cardano Citizen, the show is over and welcome for being here. Thank you is what I meant to say. We appreciate it. Please come back next week another time. I haven't gotten any better at doing the timing with the song and trying to come up with things at the top of my head. Do you believe it took me an hour to write this? Big thank you to Mark for being here. Mark, if you're listening to this, please ignore all my silly hijinks and only consider the interview itself and the professional caliber that was. Tune in next week, everyone, where I have the interview with James Dunseith from Gimbal Labs. It's another banger. All bangers. All bangers all the time. 100% bangers. Cardano Citizen out.